anywhere at any time on your smartphone, tablet, or computer. The Safeguard app makes it easy to put your mind at ease. Safeguard Security from MCTV. Your home is
Hi everyone, and welcome to This Month in Canal Fulton. And this month we are doing our State of the City address, and we've done it the last couple years in conjunction with the people at Lawrence Township and the Northwest School District. And we're going to break away from that tradition a little bit this year. We didn't really have a lot of turnout for people to ask questions, so we're going to use this episode of This Month in Canal Fulton to do our State of the City address. And for me, that's all about making sure we have the money to pay for everything, the services and the employees that we have that we're providing to the city. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Bill Rouse. And Bill is our Finance Director for the City of Canal Fulton, and he has a program to present to us. So Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. What I'd like to do is just briefly talk about the city's finances and where we stand on our income tax collections, and then maybe talk a little bit spend the rest of the time talking about what I think is an exciting tax proposal for the citizens.
Amen to that.
With that, we'll jump right in, and through the PowerPoint, when you see this chart here, this is just a snapshot of our general fund budget, the revenue sources that come into the city. Really the key thing there to see is just income tax collections are really the lifeblood of the city. We use that money to fund all the core operations, the police, the fire, the parks, and then the things that the citizens really enjoy, like the leaf pickup program in the fall, and then our road salting and so on and so forth. Really everything is funded by the income tax in some form or fashion.
Okay.
As far as the state of our income tax collections, this chart is showing our income tax collections since 2010. What's noticeable is, from 2010 through 2016, we had a pretty good trend going there where income taxes were increasing each year, more by inflation, but they were growing. If you remember last year when we did this presentation, the thing that had really concerned me at that point in time was where our income tax collections were trending for 2017. And you can see on that chart, we really took a nosedive during that time period, and a lot of it were things outside of our control. The state had passed legislation that revised income tax codes for every city in the state, and we kind of felt the effects a little more than some of the other cities, and a lot of it were timing issues. They changed the timing of collections and due dates and things, and it had me very concerned at that point, and I think I mentioned that during our State of the City address. The good news is that the 2018 collections have rebounded pretty nicely. We're up 5% compared to last year at this time. We're not quite at the 2016 levels, but we are stable, and overall the city's finances are in good shape. And so with that in mind, I think this is a good time to take on some big issues that I think could have a very positive effect for our citizens. One, for me, the primary one being tax reform. And so if you're okay, we'll spend the rest of the time talking about that.
Absolutely, let's do that. And so for our viewers, we just want to reiterate to you that where we're at with this is we introduced the idea to council at our last meeting, and we want to get your feedback from you, but it's a really big issue, and it's one that Bill and I have spent a lot of time talking about and taking it through the process. So it's really exciting. So go ahead, Bill.
When we look at this next slide, there's really two factors that the city controls or has some control over that impact the tax collections and the tax rates for our citizens. The first one is just our stated tax rate. We have a 1.5% tax on any income earned inside the city. Those have been passed by the citizens over, the last however many years, over a long period of time through different levies, and so the citizens have set that tax rate at 1.5%. The second factor that plays a role in our tax collections is the credit that we give our citizens for taxes they pay to cities outside of the city. So for example, if I'm a citizen who lives in Canal Fulton but works in Akron, I pay them 2.5% through my paycheck. And then come back to Canal Fulton, and our ordinance, this credit is set by city council through ordinance, but this ordinance says we're only going to give you credit for 50% of the taxes you've paid to another city. What we've found in looking at other cities is that's a little bit low. A lot of our neighboring cities give 100% credit, and so when we talk to our citizens and when citizens file their tax returns, I would say this is universally, unequivocally the #1 complaint from our citizens is they say they're getting double taxed. I pay, in that example, I paid Akron 2.5%, and then I come back to my town that I live in and pay another 0.75% to Canal Fulton. And it's a double taxation at a local level. In some regards, they're correct.
Absolutely.
They're absolutely correct in that regard. Now, if you fall into that camp of folks that are very unhappy about that, then I think you'll like the rest of the presentation. Okay. The one thing I'll point out is that provision was adopted by City Council in 2002. In 2002, we were a little bit of a different city. At that point, we were primarily a residential bedroom community city, where what that means is we didn't have necessarily quite the commercial or business activity in the city. We didn't have this number of employers at that point in time to support our tax base and to help prop up our tax base. Like when we compare ourselves maybe to Barberton or Greene, we didn't have that level of activity. Right. So we depended on the residents to pay for or help pay for those services that we provide, and that's what led to this 50% credit provision. If we look at the next slide, what I want to point out is really how we've changed over the years, and this is a good example of where our income tax collections were, the composition of them, before the recession or right at the recession, and what that yellow part of the pie is showing is that's the percentage that came in from payroll withholdings. These are folks that probably and most likely live outside the city, but then they come in and work in the city. So these are being generated by businesses and employers that are inside our city limits that are employing other people to come in and work for them. And so that represented 51% of the tax base at that time. The 5% is the business net profits, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's businesses in town, when they make a net profit on their through their income statement, they pay 1.5% to us as part of the tax. The next piece to that's the piece that we're really going to talk about today, is the 44%. This is the part of the tax equation that falls on all of our citizens. When at year end, when they file their tax return, they go through all those calculations and then see that we give them 50% credit for taxes paid to another city. That's what's impacting here. So at this point in 2007, we counted on our citizens to fund 44% of this. So I think what this is showing is we were kind of in that bedroom community model still at that point in time.
Right.
Now, if we flash forward, this pie chart is showing where we stood at the end of August of this year. And what you can see is we've slowly over the years have transitioned from, you know, businesses and an outside employment or the payroll withholdings representing about 50% to now they're up to about 64%. And our portion that's attributable to the citizens has gone from 44% in 2007 to 36%. Right. And there's a lot of factors that are contributing to those differences, but probably the biggest one is we've started kind of evolving or growing as a city. We've had, you know, our employment base, our employers and number of employers has grown during that period of time. Right. And the economy has improved as right. well. And so that part is doing a little bit better than where we used to be.
Right.
So
so when you talk about 64%, you're adding the 56% and the net
in the net profit. Okay. You're correct.
Yeah. So those two numbers added together.
Right.
So we've really seen some growth in our city as from the standpoint of transitioning from that bedroom community in 2001 when Canal Fulton went from being a village to becoming a city. And it's been a growing process. You know, we're still in our teens, we're still teenagers as a city, but we think we're ready to make that next step into cityhood,
right.
kind of like manhood, where we're stepping up here. And so I'll let you continue with your presentation, Bill. Go ahead.
And you're absolutely correct in your summarization there. The other thing that's happened, though, since 2002 is other cities around us and have evolved, and in particular, their tax policies have evolved around us. And it used to be, I don't have the survey here from 2002, but I would be willing to bet if we looked at our 1.5% tax rate at that time, we were probably pretty comparable to other cities. I think 2% was probably the most common at that point, but you had a lot more that were between that range of 1.5 right. and 2. But what's happened over the last 10 years, I can tell you, you know, Akron, Canton, Barberton, New Franklin, Greene have all passed tax increases. And what this chart is showing you is how our tax rate compares right now to everybody around us. And you can see at 1.5%, we're pretty low compared to other cities. And
right.
in particular, to the primary employers of Akron and Canton and Barberton for our citizens.
Right.
But the other thing that has changed too, though, is as those cities, those bigger cities have grown and evolved and passed their tax rate increases, they've also changed their policy on credits, you know, that they give their citizens to now they're really giving, most of them are giving 100% credit.
Right.
And what this is showing here, as they've changed, we've kind of become the anomaly over that time period at our 1.5% tax rate and then a 50% credit. And in fact, we are the only city on this list that's giving less than 60% credit. And there's really only 3 or 4 cities here that give anything less than 100%. So we're really the anomaly in that regard.
So we understand why our citizens are coming in and complaining. You know?
Absolutely.
You know, and we understand why it's harder for people and families to decide to move to Canal Fulton. Even though you can't tell it by the real estate market, people are dealing with that, and sometimes it's because they don't understand until they get here, and then we have to turn around and explain it to them, and it's a bitter pill to swallow. So
you're absolutely correct, and that's this next slide is showing that, and I don't know if you have this slide, so I can let you see it, but this is an example that I gave to City Council that shows the dilemma that you've pointed out with some citizens, and validates really their complaint. Let's take a situation where you have a non-citizen that lives in the district. That you can really just take a look at my situation. I live in New Franklin, but my kids go to school at Northwest, and then I work in Canal Fulton. So I pay the 1% tax to Northwest schools because of my kids going there, and then when I work in Canal Fulton, I pay 1.5% income tax to Canal Fulton. So my tax rate for Canal Fulton purposes, my total tax rate is 2.5%. Now let's say that you, as a citizen of Canal Fulton, let's say that you were working in Green full time. So you, as a citizen of Canal Fulton and the school district, you pay your 1% to school district for their tax. You work in Green, so you pay 2% to them. And then you come back, and because of our credit policy and us not changing as we've evolved, you pay another 0.75% to us. And so your total tax rate is 3.75% as a resident of Canal Fulton, whereas I'm at 2.5%. And I don't live in Canal Fulton, but I work in Canal Fulton. And so the thing that becomes why it is inequitable to our citizens is that me working in town, my kids go to school in town, I work in town, I go do all my grocery shopping in town, so I'm using all the city's roads, I'm using police and fire protection, I receive the benefit of road salting and everything else that I do. But because the way our tax rate is structured, it penalizes our citizen and favors me coming into town and earning my income in town.
And if we can talk about you personally, because you live in New Franklin, so their tax rate is 2%. So when they're giving you credit for 1.5% you pay in Canal Fulton, but then you still have to turn around and pay New Franklin another 0.5%. Is that correct?
I pay 0.5% to New Franklin, but what they receive, any of our residents that are working in New Franklin, they also get the 2% for that individual there too. So it's, for our Canal Fulton purposes, I pay less to Canal Fulton and to the Northwest than what you would as a resident of Canal Fulton, even though I use the services probably at a very similar level or rate, And that's the disparity that with all those cities evolving around us and the changes, that's what's kind of come out of this is that inequity. If we look at the next slide, the question becomes, well, why, when our citizens are working outside of the city, what tax rate are they paying? Where are the bulk of our citizens working, so that we can kind of figure out what their tax liability is. And what this chart is showing you is the tax rate that's most common. And for us, for our city, to me, if you take the 35.275 or 27%, what that's saying is 35% of our citizens are working in a city that they pay a 2% income tax. Another 28.84% are working in a city where they pay a 2.25% income tax. And then 1.17% are working in a city where they pay more than 2.25%. The reason that that is important, if you add those three percentages together, what it ends up being is about 65% of our citizens are working in cities where they're already paying 2% or more in payroll taxes. The reason that that's important is if we were to change our tax credit policy, those are the individuals that we know for a fact would have a tax break. Their tax bill would go down. So 65% of the population there that work outside of the city would get a tax cut immediately. Another 6% are working in cities at a tax rate of 1.5% to 1.9%. My guess is the bulk of them would also have a tax benefit by changing our policy. But you'd have to look at their specific situations. And then the other 29%, they're working in cities where they pay less than 1.5%, and that means they're working in most cases in villages or townships where they don't have an income tax. Right. But the key takeaway here is that really the bulk of our citizens are working in cities like Greene, Barberton, Akron, Canton, Massillon, where they're paying a 2% tax rate and would stand to benefit by us adopting some kind of tax reform.
Okay.
So, with that in mind, the tax policy proposal that we made to City Council last week was two-pronged. In my mind, this is the way to fix this. The first one is to ask our voters to increase our tax rate from 1.5% to 2%. That puts us in line with all those cities that we showed, that are our neighboring cities and where their tax rates are. It helps us evolve to where they're at. But by the same token, then we would ask City Council to pass an ordinance that gives our citizens, full credit for taxes they're paying to other cities, and gives them that benefit.
Okay.
The question would become, I think, would come from a citizen. Why not just give the 100% credit and keep the 1.5% income tax?
Right.
The problem is for us is if we did that, if we gave 100% credit without a revenue adjustment elsewhere, we would lose about $370,000 in revenue.
Okay.
Which would necessitate, in our case, it would necessitate layoffs and a drastic reduction in services, which we don't want to pursue at this point, especially when we're at a point where we're financially healthy in the model we're in. We would need that tax rate to go up in order to offset that loss. What this proposal does, the key piece to this proposal is it's taking and balancing the tax rate that our non-citizens, when they work in town, are paying to make it equal with what our citizens are paying.
Exactly.
It's normalizing that and getting it to kind of an equal level, if that makes sense.
Right. Going back to that scenario, the screen we had up there about someone working in Greene.
Right.
Where we want the taxes to be more equitable.
Right. And by doing that, it will change the revenue in a way that it'll allow us to give our citizens that tax break that they deserve, in my mind.
Right.
So we touched on some of them already, but the advantages to looking at this model is that there's 5 of them in my mind. One, the very first one, most important, is most of our citizens the majority of them would receive a tax break. Okay. We've pointed to 65% are paying a higher tax rate. Those folks would receive a tax break just by doing that proposal. The second one is that tax filing for our citizens becomes a lot easier. If our tax code is very similar to all of our neighboring cities.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Yes, we can eliminate a lot of our crazy instructions and calculations on this credit. The other beauty to this is that and for a lot of the folks that would be impacted, it would eliminate the need for estimated taxes and quarterly billings and things of that nature. It becomes a little more universal, it's a little more standard, like the federal and the state tax returns.
Right. Okay.
The third thing is our tax rates become consistent for citizens and non-citizens that work in the city. And in that example I gave comparing me and you, if our tax rate's 2%, I'd pay 1% to the school, 2% to Canal Fulton. My total tax rate's 3%. If we have full credit now for taxes paid to other cities, when you work in Green, you'll pay 2% to Green, you'll pay 1% to the school district, and then you're done. You're at 3%. So we're both now at 3%. And it normalizes it, and that's the way it should be, since both of us are benefiting from the city of Canal Fulton and its services.
Okay. Excellent.
The fourth advantage is the city stabilizes its primary revenue source. It kind of emphasizes the piece that's growing on for us, the payroll withholding, places a little less reliance, a little less dependence on our citizens. And the most important, there's no impact on our retirees.
Okay.
The disadvantages, there are a few folks we've identified that could end up paying a little bit more in tax. If you're a citizen living in Canal Fulton and working in the city, your tax rate will go up to 2%.
That's me.
Yes.
Okay. So as far as when I sell real estate or I work as an employee of the city of Canal Fulton, my income tax is going to go up. So I understand that. And we have about 40 employees who would be in that category that work in the city.
What through some of our preliminary analyses, we think when we reviewed all of our W-2s last year, there's about 400 of our citizens that work in town, that live in town, work in town. That's about 13% of our registered voter population. But what we don't know is there's a couple mitigating factors. So out of those 400, what we don't know is what percentage of them are under 18 years old. Because our tax code, we don't tax kids, student workers. So if you're under 18, you automatically get a refund on that. So that they wouldn't be impacted. The other part of it is, if you work in the city, live in the city, you will pay more. But if your spouse works outside the city, they will pay far less. And so even though you have a little bit of a change, your overall household still may have a tax cut. And that's where, if you fall into this category, we would encourage you to kind of look at it as case specific and contact our income tax department, and they can run some numbers to tell you how you specifically would be impacted.
Very good. This is going to be a vote that is very individual or family-based specific. If council goes ahead and decides to adopt legislation, which means what we're saying is we're going to pass legislation that says we'll give 100% credit if the voters pass this in May of next year, is what the target date is that we may be looking at here. So it's a lot of information to take in. It's something that's been a problem in Canal Fulton for a number of years. We're trying to address it. It's not perfect because my taxes are going to go up if this passes, and I urge you to find out what is the impact for you individually or your family, and more importantly, not to go to social media and listen to what outside people say who don't live in the city of Canal Fulton. This is for citizens of Canal Fulton. So we encourage you to call us and we will calculate your individual income taxes. We are not desperate. We're not begging you, and we really feel like this is a one-time deal where we just want to tell you this is a chance to make it right, to even the burden.